Hi everybody, and welcome to this special Radio Prague debate, Czech Euroscepticism, Causes and Possible Effects. My name is Ian Willoughby, I'm a journalist with Radio Prague, and our guests today are at the far end here of this rather cramped desk, Cyril Svoboda, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs when the Czech Republic joined the European Union in May 2004. He now heads the Diplomatic Academy here in Prague. Beside him is Lenka Zlámalová, a journalist and commentator with the news organization Echo 24 or Echo 24. Beside her, Tomáš Weiss, who heads the Department of European Studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Charles University here. And right beside me, Jan Macháček, a former dissident, a journalist and commentator who's now with the Institute for Politics and Society, which is a think tank affiliated with the acting Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš's ANO party. The State Secretary for European Affairs, Aleš Kmelář, was also due to join us here today, but unfortunately he couldn't make it in the end. Anyway, I'd like to immediately get to the kernel of the issue that we're all here to discuss today. In 2003, there was a referendum here in the Czech Republic on joining the European Union. 77% of Czech voters voted to join. Now, however, we've seen a series of polls that have suggested support for the EU or EU membership has fallen considerably since that time. There was one survey in February of this year that indicated that only 54% of Czechs would vote to remain in the EU, and a Eurobarometer report published in December found that only 30% of Czechs have a positive view of the EU, and that's the second lowest in the whole bloc. So I'd like to ask our guests, have a significant number of Czech voters become sceptical about EU membership? And if they have, why has that happened? And we'll begin perhaps with Lenka Zlámalová, please.
Thank you very much for invitation. Nice evening. It's quite easy to answer this question. I think that during this time, European Union changed dramatically. Right now, there is much more after Greek crisis and all this development, financial crisis. There is much pressure for deeper integration, which is not exactly in the way in which many people seeing their ideal European Union. And second point, I think that was migration crisis. And opening these borders for a lot of migrants to the Germany. And I think that many people are convinced right now in the Czech Republic that European Union is working not for their interest, but against their interest.
Could I ask you, please, for a comment, Cyril Svoboda?
Good evening to everyone. Thank you for inviting me. In my view, in my country, there is nearly no Euroscepticism. Not at all. The problem is with political elite. The political elite is playing very artificial and dangerous game with the society. That's the problem. Started with Václav Klaus. He was against EU when we prepared the referendum on EU. And believe me, so 100,000 people put to the voting box blank papers, not to say yes and no. So because at the time of Václav Klaus, it was maybe a political position against the coalition government, against us. So it was a typical domestic conflict we had in the Czech country. Now, I share the view that we are now facing the problem with migration, some other problems, but the political elite is now playing artificial games, speaking about the referendum and how to obtain the votes next day. If you read the books on EU went through many other crises and survived. And now, so the elite is now playing game and changing the mind of the society. So the problem is not to ask what is the meaning of the people, but the question is, what is the strategy of the political elite in the Czech Republic? That's a problem. So, because whenever everyone who reads Blesk or some other newspapers, they are ready to change their mind, of course. So, of course, it's very easy. But what is the most important is, the problem is how to encourage elite to be more brave, to say EU despite the conflicts we are facing. Notwithstanding with the complications, but to say yes, because it is a wise decision. So that's my comment. And I'm not asking people. Sorry. People are not to ask them the question. So I'm asking the political elite.
Tomáš Weiss, please.
Thank you for having me. And as a representative of the institution where the debate is actually taking place, I'm really happy to have it here because I think it's relevant. I kind of disagree with both speakers. I think, in my view, my truth or my view of the things is somewhere in between. I think that the crises that the EU had to go through obviously influenced how we see the EU. It is not that would be the first crisis, but that were probably the first major crises while we were already members. So we somehow felt it more personally, or at least we felt the impact of the crisis on us more than we could feel the crises that were there before. At the same time, I agree that the Czechs are not Eurosceptics. I think that the Czechs don't care, mostly. That they are simply ignorant. That they are skeptical in terms of skeptical towards anything which resembles institutions. And if you look at the numbers of the trusts to institutions, you'll see that the European Parliament has got the same trust as the Czech Parliament, or even a few percentage points higher. So I don't really think that the Czech skepticism would be anyhow oriented towards the EU. I think it is generally oriented towards institutions and politics. And I partly agree that the Czech politicians have tried to abuse this skepticism, but I don't think that we are anyhow special in that. I mean, all European politicians abuse the fact that some decisions are taken at the EU level, and I don't really think that the Czechs would be anyhow more skeptical than the others. They may be more ignorant or more disinterested or more uninformed, which is definitely the case of the political elite as well. So that's probably true. And the discourse has been very particular and very peculiar, I think, in the Czech Republic, but I still have some doubts about the skepticism in general.
Jan Macháček, please.
Thank you. So I agree that these two crises definitely had an impact on public opinion, even though it was certainly for Czechs who follow the media on a daily basis, it was the migration crisis was more important for damaging the reputation than the troubles of the Eurozone. But if we speak about Eurozone for a little while, it's certainly clear that Eurozone didn't reform itself anyhow after the crisis in any important manner. There were basically two ways to reform it. One is what FDP in Germany was proposing, going to the basics, so like to forbid public aid to bankrupt countries, etc. Other was to establish some institutions which usually monetary unions have, like some common bond, European bond, or some at least deposit insurance scheme. All these things are only being talked about, so the euro is still in the state of experiment, and the debt of public debt of many countries is still very high and unresolved. But if we speak about Czechs, this is not specific to Czechs. All the other countries which are not in the Eurozone, for instance, or which disagree with the distribution of asylum seekers are should have the same position, but Czechs are somehow more skeptical. So I agree with Tomáš Weiss that Czechs are perhaps more ignorant, but I'm a little bit schizophrenic in this. I'm against stereotypes about nations and about national character. On the other hand, there might be something about the fact that Czechs being really too skeptical and too ignorant. Czechs in good times, there is no... Well, Czechs are constantly complaining, you know. If you I always give an example of a shop owner, for instance, or shop manager who complains when his store is empty, and when it's two people are shopping, he is also complaining, having too much work. And Czechs are constantly bumbling, especially where nothing important is in stake. So if you would ask people question in a more dramatic way, like, would you agree with the end of Schengen and with border controls being implemented again, you would definitely see very different opinion. If you would ask them, with the common European market disintegrating, you would probably lose your job if you are working in a manufacturing, whatever, car industry, for instance. Would you be happy about it? So if you would ask people these questions, the situation would be certainly much different. But these are basically good, prosperous times for normal people. They don't feel anyhow existentially threatened. So they are just complaining, and they don't risk anything by this complaining to the pollsters. So if the real drama is on the table, people would react differently.
You mentioned Schengen. Also, we've had free movement of labour, you also mentioned. And from the first day the Czechs joined the European Union, the country has been a net recipient of EU funding. There's been massive investments in this country, all over the country, in EU projects. Why are these things, these benefits to Czechs, not resonating more with the electorate? From my perspective, they've been benefiting for all these years. Why don't they appreciate it more? Tomáš? Well, our Tomáš Weiss, he's got the microphone. So.
Okay, I hold the microphone because I sit in the middle. I'm ready to give it to anybody. But I think that in the Czech public discourse, this money has been considered as entitlement, not a benefit. We deserved it somehow, because to some extent in the Czech public debate, already before the country acceded the EU, there had been this sort of economic argument about joining the EU. But if you talk about many Europeans from the so-called old countries or old member states, they obviously see the economic benefit, but they also see the political benefit. Nobody has really talked about politics, and nobody kind of had prepared the Czech population that there would be a political part of being in the EU, and in that case, I think that the Czechs have seen the funds as something they have deserved by joining the EU, because that was what had been presented to them. I also, if I may use half a minute more, I also think that this is very risky, because at the moment I don't think that the Czechs are very skeptical, but as soon as we become too rich, this whole argument about the EU giving us money will somehow stop working, and there is, at the moment at least, there's nothing that can replace it. So I would actually expect much more Euroscepticism at the moment that we actually become net payers,
which will be in a few years.
Which, well, we don't really know. It depends. Well, it could be actually in a couple of years, depending on how the negotiations over the multi-annual financial framework will look like. We haven't really taken part in them yet, although they have already started. So it actually may be rather sooner than later if we can't defend our interests, which we traditionally haven't been very good at. I would say in the EU institutions.
I'd like to ask Lenka Zlámalová, do you think Czechs should be more, in a sense, grateful for the flow of money coming from the European Union?
That's complicated question, you know. That's not isolated only this Euro funds. You have to see bigger picture. Right now, you know, we are, let's say, in European ensemble line in industry, and Czech Republic is great source of income and profits, which is coming to richer countries. Couple of months ago, there was a very interesting article by Thomas Piketty, famous French economist, who described, let's say, sources of Euroscepticism around the whole Union. And, of course, there was some South-North division because of transfers of money from Germany to Greece and so on. And another one was West-East, and there were very nice data how much money came to these countries by subsidies, and how much more money left those countries as incomes. And I think that ordinary people are seeing, or general public are seeing all these things in bigger picture than only subsidy. Let me say how many people used personally this money from EU funds, especially this, let's say, money now for infrastructure, but this money for some NGOs and these think tanks and so on. They are not visible money in Czech economy and in Czech society.
But there is also a lot of visible money, like in sports centers and whatnot, all around the country.
But I think that and some people not regarding direct benefits in their lives. That's the reason.
I think Cyril Svoboda wants to come in on this question.
In my view, money is important argument, but not the most one. Definitely, it is not the most important argument. The problem, I give you one story. 2 days ago, I participated in a conference where there were two members of the House of Lords. One was hereditary law, the second one was elected. They were in a huge conflict on Brexit. Paradoxically, hereditary lord votes against Brexit, and elected lord in favor. And what was the most important question? What will happen with Ireland? And I was given a strange answer to my question. One lord said, yes, when the Brits leaves UK, the Irish will vote for leaving EU. And the second lord said, no, when EU is leaving, if UK is leaving EU, so the Irish, they will say, where is the referendum? We want to be united. We are not going to become a new Cyprus. And paradoxically, the political elite now is facing a new phenomenon, which is very important for the United Kingdom, if it is still United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or not. Immediately they pay some different price, because the main campaign on the question to remain or to leave was money. And that's the problem. Money is not the most important argument. So we are enjoying Schengen area. We are enjoying being in EU. And the second example, Donald Trump, he decided to impose some restriction on steel and aluminium. And now he changed his mind, because EU is a market which has to be respected.
I think Trump's mind changes all the time. It's not really related to reality.
Yes. Sorry mentioning him. So I'm stopping my intervention. But so the problem is, when we are speaking about EU, speaking about money, so it is, of course, I understand that it is important, but it is a temporary solution. So now we are receiving, and one day we will be rich enough, so we will have to pay. And the answer is yes, we have to pay.
Jan Macháček, would you like to come in on this point?
I think that there are some things which new member it's not new anymore, but like still we can use it. Perhaps new member countries of the European Union, or like countries of V4 or post-communist countries, or whatever we call them, they have very few important similarities. One of them is that their banking sector is fully controlled by Western European banks. And even though the ways these countries were privatized were originally a little bit different in every particular case, they ended up in the same situation. So you couldn't do anything about it, because if at a certain point you let Czechs to control their own banking system, they basically only thing they did was like asset stripping and stealing, and the banks went bankrupt. So you cannot blame anyone on this. But Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, everyone ended in the same situation. Their banking sector is very profitable, extremely profitable, controlled by the Western mothers, which are much less profitable themselves, and a lot from all these profits and dividends is coming from the banking sector. At a certain moment, it was very important, because at least the bank was taken out of control of political parties and governments, etc. So originally, it was very positive for the economy. And second thing, as far as the economy is concerned, are other foreign investments which are also very profitable, and the dividends are going abroad. But the question is like, if to regulate it, some countries, unfortunately countries which are associated with some nationalist populism, whatever, have a special banking tax, etc. But so I don't agree with this, but it doesn't explain. When you call this debate, it doesn't explain why Czechs are more skeptical than others, because what is in this Piketty's bloc, it's explained that basically all of us are in a way colonies, even though I don't want to use it in this pejorative term, but so it doesn't explain that Czechs are more skeptical than Poles or Slovaks, and so there must be something about Czechs which is different. But this economic situation with people complaining about low wages, it's the same in all the other countries. And as far as the subsidies are concerned, and you mentioned it, like not all these subsidies are visible. People who definitely appreciate the investments into highways, roads, whatever, infrastructure projects, but you have common agriculture policy, you have all these like wellness hotels or whatever, which normal people don't have much use of it, etc. So it's not that black and white. And also a very important topic is if you can compare subsidies with the outflow of dividends. It's an important topic in itself.
Well, Lenka Zlámalová wants to come back in here.
Yeah. Come back to this Piketty comparison. We are much more productive in many ways and rich than other Central European countries. That's the reason why in the Czech Republic this disbalance is much more higher than in Hungary, which is poorer also than in Poland and than in Slovakia, because our let's say, contacts with German industry is the highest in the region. And there is a very nice indicator for, let's say, your productivity and your wage, which is GDP wage ratio in the Czech Republic is one of lowest in whole EU. First one is Romania. Second one is Ireland, which is a really special case because Ireland is a very rich country, but with a lot of foreign capital outflow also. And third one is Czech Republic. For better understanding, in the Czech case, it's something around 39% if you compare GDP to the wage. And highest ratio is in Switzerland, where is 58 or something. Some average in Western economies is more than 40. I think that many people feels that difference in after more than one decade in the European Union, that our living standards compared to other parts of European Union are really lower, and other productivity isn't so lower, and people feeling this kind of, let's say, disbalances.
Tomáš Weiss?
I would just like to add two things. I'm afraid that this is a typical case of a problem which is assigned to the EU, but in fact is homemade. First, the structural funds or the cohesion funds. The EU hasn't decided that we should build wellness centers from these funds. This is what we have decided. This is just the money that we got from the EU. And I wasn't blaming it on EU. No, I wasn't referring to you. I just wanted to make this point clear, that in many cases we have actually misspent the EU money, but it was our failure, not the failure of the EU. But this is obviously something that people can't see, and we can't really blame them for not seeing it. The second thing is that the state, even in the infrastructure project, has failed to spend it wisely and timely. And the result was that even in the money which could have been spent much better and actually efficiently, much of it was spent towards the end of the financial period, just in order to spend it, not really to spend it for a good purpose. Because the good purposes were not prepared. Again, this is not something that is of the EU making. It is of our making, and it is according to our laws that we can change if we want to. So this is one part of the problem. I would like to. I'm not an economist myself, but I would somehow like to just raise a point. I don't know how valid it is with the outflow of the dividends. And I really don't know, what a fair share would be. But isn't it the case that if these foreign companies hadn't invested in here, there wouldn't have been the jobs? So it is somehow okay. It might be that they should spend more of the money here or leave more of the money here, but I'm not really sure that if they hadn't invested, that we would have been much better off than we are at the moment. So yes, the outflow of the dividends of the capital is or may be significant. I really can't evaluate that. But again, the fact how high our wages are is not of the EU making or of the foreign companies making. It is of our making. How we can negotiate for our wages, how the government sets the conditions. So I still think that this is not much that should fuel the Euroscepticism, although obviously it sometimes does.
Both Lenka and Mr. Svoboda want to come in, so if you can keep your comments short, please. So we can move on.
Very short comment, and more, let's say, generally. In the whole world, there is not country which is rich because of subsidies. On the other hand, there are countries which received a lot of subsidies. There is economy and society not working, especially Greece. I remember very well quote of famous German economist Hans Werner Sinn, who said many years ago that everybody who is trying doing any business in Greece is idiot, because it's better to set up company and ask for European money. So I think that you ask grateful. I don't think that it's a way to be wealthy country.
Mr. Svoboda, a short comment, please.
Yes. Very short, because I fully share the comment that many problems we are now have with the EU are the domestic ones. So the number of operational programs, it was also the decision of the Czech government. So it is very, very important. So, but I want to say something different. The problem, speaking about the Czechs, the problem is not the problem of money and subsidies, because it is, in my view, very complicated to be understood by the normal people. But the problem is through the faces. One problem, in my view, is that your Jean-Claude Juncker, he represents everything what has happened in EU. And how can we run the European elections with him as the President of the Commission? Because it's a political game. So the problem is that the Brexit is also the fruit of arrogance of the European Commission to the Brits. So we have to rethink the strategy how to defend Europe politically. And my recommendation is to replace the people. Because if there is a new face, maybe some nice lady, good looking, why not? It's good for attracting people. So, because the situation is extremely complicated now, and we can lose too much, because I watch TV, so I do it very rarely. But one day I watched TV, there was I don't know, it was maybe the program 168 or something like that. And the economists, they spoke about Eurozone and EU, and everyone said, so it could be a huge mistake to leave EU. Good. And next, Mr. Okamura. And he was repeating the same slogans. So not listening any rational argument, because we will be in the very irrational debate. And my recommendation how to defend EU is to stand up firmly with EU. Of course, we do understand that there are problems, and we have to reform EU, of course. But to say clearly that we are to support EU and politically to help to change the climate, because the arguments you are absolutely right. But please explain it to my mother-in-law. It is extremely difficult.
Earlier, you mentioned political parties. Sorry, excuse me.
Yes,
please keep it brief.
Yeah, no, sorry. I also asked for a little technical remark. Reacting to what Tomáš Weiss said, I didn't mean it, and it was somehow avoidable. It was a normal phase of our economic history. It was a normal phase of our economic transformation. There was no other ways at that particular moment than to give Czech banks for £1 to experienced foreign owners, because it was tried many times, and some financial groups even tried it repeatedly. If you gave the banks to Czechs, they just stole the assets. That was the reality. And then also it was unavoidable to somehow support foreign investments coming and to create jobs here. So it was a very important in a particular phase. But now we are in a different phase. It's just that simple. But one little remark about special. There is definitely something special in this country that bureaucrats tend to make these European whatever directives or whatever it is called, which are unpopular in itself. They make it even worse. There was this famous case of donuts a few years ago that someone said that donuts, koblehy in Czech, have to be sold only in plastic bag or something, that it's a European Union directive. And it was everywhere in newspaper. They even started to wrap donuts into plastic bags, and then it was found out that it's nonsense. That it
Sounds
was invented.
Like the old straight banana of
well,
war.
it's a little bit different than banana. Banana is also a very interesting thing, but we can talk about it later. But there are very, very. You could have like dozens examples of that. The Czech bureaucrat at a particular minister invents something on his own and says that this is his explanation of European directive, and it's somehow Czech bureaucrats are especially like somehow very creative, and or I'm not afraid of the word
they
stupid.
Like their rules.
Stupid in
they
this.
like their rules. If you could speak about political parties, very few of the main parties here are unequivocally positive on EU membership, and I'm wondering if they are in a sense, which you seem to believe, Mr. Svoboda, responsible for the apparent fall in support for the EU, or are they simply logically responding to the public mood by being lukewarm on the EU or even hostile to it in some cases? Tomáš Weiss, maybe you could begin with this.
Okay, I still keep the mic. Well, I think to some extent it is a chicken and egg problem. What was first? But frankly, I think you can't wait for a shift in the public mood. You need the statesmen, the statespersons, to actually lead. We have had a couple of leaders, but some of them in wrong direction, in my opinion. But I think that the political parties are really a key. I think that Czech political parties are, in terms of the EU, but in broader terms, in terms of anything that is beyond the Czech borders, a disaster. They just lack experience, they lack knowledge, they lack interest, they lack people. They do not have people that would actually understand the EU, and without the expertise, you can't build up reasonable arguments. So in the end, you end up with politicians without the support from their political parties, saying things that are nonsensic, just because they think that in the short term this might help. And there's very little feedback and very little critical debate among the politicians, because there are not that many of them that actually understand what they are talking about once it comes to the EU. So sure, I think the political parties are the key to this. We need more people in the political parties that actually speak languages, are able to read Financial Times, are able to translate what's actually the debate in the EU at the EU level, so that the Czech politicians can actually prepare some positions that are relevant for the current state of the debate, and then they can promote Czech interests, and they can victoriously come back home and sell how good the EU is because they have secured this and that. As they fail to do that, then it is very difficult for them to show how positive the EU is for the Czechs.
Who'd like to come in next? Yes, Jan.
I'm afraid that it's impossible to understand the European Union. I'm a pro-European Union myself, but I just find it impossible even for a professional. It's such a complicated structure. How can anyone say that he understands it? You have EU treaties, you have para-EU mechanisms, you have extra-EU mechanisms. How many people know, for instance, that this ESM, which is a very important instrument which has been created during the Eurozone crisis, it's extra EU treaties. It's a para mechanism. Then you have things which are completely out of the European Union on intergovernmental, voluntary intergovernmental basis, like Lisbon Treaty, for instance, and even lawyers don't understand it. This is all so incredibly complicated that it's impossible to explain it to normal people. So what smart politicians or responsible politicians do or what only thing they can do, they can basically they can stick to very simple slogans. They can say, I don't know, that it's a peace project, or they can say that Brussels is not everything, that it's like if you would live in the United States, you would constantly speak about Washington, D.C., even though it's which is just a seat of the federal government. But why should you associate the United States with Washington, D.C., which is not a very nice place anyway, just these faceless government buildings, whatever. So, but no Americans would ever think that they would associate their United States with Washington, D.C. Why? So you can stick to these slogans, or you can say that you have to fight for, you have to be active, you have to fight for your national interests. But to explain Europe, it's almost impossible, because it's almost impossible to understand it, because what is being there, all these layers of different structures. It's also not a federation, it's not a confederation, it's a project, it's a very unstable project which is developing, and it's extremely complicated to explain it to even to so-called experts.
Maybe Mr. Svoboda.
You are partly right, but partly. So the Czech civil code is not better reading. Do you understand the Czech civil code? It is 381 paragraphs. And even the lawyers, they do not understand properly the Czech civil code. So I agree that it is very complicated to understand the treaties, of course. But we have to simplify the problem because we want to push the country in the right direction. I give you one example. Quotas. Famous story. So it was decided according to the Article 78, you are expert on the treaty, Article 78, paragraph 3. It was decided the quotas properly. No doubt. And it is impossible to say in the Czech Republic that it is a dictate. Because it is not a dictate. It is a fair decision. Of course, we have the right. Of course, we have the right that to say we do not share politically the decision. That's correct. And it is unfair from the European Commission to accuse the Czech Republic if the allocation program is just functioning from the 20% and we are punished because of the political position. Of course, we could say we do not agree politically. But who was at the time of passing the decision to say correctly, it was decided correctly? Because it was decided correctly. So if that it was mistake, now we know, of course, and politically that it was not functioning, of course, I do agree. I share the opinion, and now I share the position of my country that we are against the notion of the European Commission, against to the European Court, against the Czech Republic. But so the problem is now political one to be courageous enough to say it was decided correctly, but we do not agree. There are so many people in the Czech Republic which we do not agree with the decision of the Czech courts, including the Constitutional Court. Many people, they do not agree. And we are saying, but it was decided by the authority which was entitled to decide. So that's my comment that I understand that it's very complicated, but sometimes we have to tell the true story, what is happening in EU. And back to my party, I'm fully disappointed with my party now, because I'm still asking, so do you read the documents, the EU documents? Do you read, so speaking of the leaders of my party, do you read maybe the conclusions of the European Council? So are you familiar with the discours, Emmanuel Macron discours, La Vision Européenne? No one has interest. So that's very easy to say we are against EU because they are not familiar with what is going on.
Lenka, no. Oh, okay.
I would like, if I may, I would like to react to what Jan Macháček said. I don't really think that the EU system is obviously complicated. I don't think that there aren't any people who actually understand it. The Czech state administration is full of people that actually know very well what's going on. At many ministries, you've got really number of experts that do understand that. But that is not the point. I don't really think that the voters should actually understand how the system works. What I require is that my politicians, my representatives who are paid from my taxes, know how the system works, or at least They listen to people who know how the system works, and they take the decision based on some sort of information. And in my reading of what has been happening for the past couple of years, not least in the case of the relocation mechanisms, which was badly mismanaged by the Czech politicians and by the Czech government. Again, the politicians, not that much the government. The officials had known from the very beginning. I think this is just a lack of information, and it is a responsibility to take decisions without having the proper information. This is you can't really apologize for that.
Lenka, Zlámalová wanted to come in there.
What is politics? Politics is art of communication and art of decision. So we are paying politicians for really fighting for our interest. And in the European Union, it is not question be pro-European or anti-European or Euro-realistic. We are paying politicians for really fighting for our interest in Europe. And a lot of countries have a different interest than we have. So, especially this migration case or whole Dublin IV debate, our interests are definitely different than Greek, Italian interests, and that's the game. And it's not a question who is pro-project and anti-project. It's important debate about concrete issues, migration, fiscal union, all this stuff.
Jan Macháček, sorry, we have to move on very soon after this.
I just wanted to correct myself, since it's recorded when I said that Lisbon Treaty is extra. It's not. I meant Stability and Growth Pact of this. So ESM is called para-EU structure, and Stability and Growth Pact is called like extra EU structure. So it's just to illustrate how and. You have so many abbreviations concerning how the EU is governed. It's unbelievable. So I think the fact that it's too complicated really has to do with the levels of Euroscepticism in particular countries. Because I don't know, if you have a normal federation, you have a president, you have a government, you have Congress, and it's even little kids understand how the government is constituted.
I suspect the reason most of you are here this evening is because you'd like to know about the issue of a possible referendum on the Czech Republic leaving the European Union, which has been really not dominating, but very big in Czech politics in recent times. Are any of you in favor of a vote on leaving or remaining in the European Union?
I would like to correct this one. I think that not the real issue. Some very pro-European media are taking this point and writing a lot of articles, the real danger of Czechs. No, that's artificial issue in Czech debate. There is not real danger having a referendum right now or in next 5 years about exit of Czech Republic from European Union. Another debate is joining Eurozone. It's a completely different debate. Right now you have to have a really majority in parliament and so on. And it's a really artificial question. Yeah, and it's necessary to know.
Cyril, Svoboda?
Sorry, I totally disagree with this position. Because it's extremely risky. One example. I was on plane from Paris to London at the date of voting of Brexit. And the two Brits were sitting next to me. Both voted for Brexit. Why? Because they hated Cameron. The only reason. They hated Cameron. They were from somewhere from countryside, not knowing anything about EU and about structures, etc. So if there's a referendum, it is extremely risky. Maybe because my wife is in favor, I am against. Why not? It's not the case. My wife is excellent, and we are sharing the views, but it is extremely risky. And I am strictly against, so even the open the debate and thinking it is not real, we are just good gold Schweiks, social Schweiks, Schweiks. So we in the very end we will say yes. When the notion of the direct election of the president started, nobody believed that something like that could be passed. And now we have direct elections. So because everything is... No. I was outside Parliament. No, we were outside the Parliament.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So please believe me. So I was against the direct election of the president, and it is what I really hate. It is just a game. Why not? Why not to open the debate on a referendum? Because so it could be helpful. It could gain us some votes. So why? There's no need. No need. And some days ago, I watched the movie Never Surrender of Churchill. It is a good example. And sometime the Churchill, he said, no, it will be different. Against the opinion of the majority. And if you read the books on the beginning of the integration, so the Marshall Plan was based on 5 conditions, and I'm not repeating all the conditions, but generally, in 1947, the political elite said something important. Germany is not guilty. The Nazis were guilty, but not Germany. So it was very brave. It was against the meaning of the vast majority in the society. And the leaders are to keep the line which is good for my country, not to ask people what is to be done, because Blesk is not good instrument how to manage the political atmosphere in my country.
Tomáš Weiss?
I kind of agree with both of the speakers. This time I kind of agree with both of you, not disagree. I agree with Cyril Svoboda that it is particularly risky to raise this issue in the public debate, because you can get there through some sort of salami method. Now it is feasible to talk about that, and suddenly it is feasible to talk about more. And you end up being somewhere where even Cameron probably didn't want to be. But at the same time, I agree with Lenka Zlámalová that it is a no-go at the moment. I don't think that it would be because if there was a motion in the parliament, that the parliament would vote against it. But I think that at this particular moment, Andrej Babiš has got his business in Germany, not in the East. So for him personally, that would mean financial loss if we get out of the EU. And the subsidies, obviously. So he will never allow for a referendum on this issue. Obviously the problem is that once you start talking about that, and Andrej Babiš is gone, then we don't know who comes next. And for them, it may be even, business venture to actually get out of the EU. So in that sense, I think it is dangerous talking about it, but I don't really think that there is any chance of having a referendum in the years to come.
Jan Macháček?
Well, I think it was mentioned here that paradoxically it was started by pro-European people, pro-European enthusiasts who just made it an issue because what was the situation like 3 months ago? Like the first Radek Špicar from Union of Industry, vice president, he tweeted, "I was approached by Japanese investors and they were asking about Czechs." So 2 days later, Hospodářské noviny, unfortunately, Ondřej Houska just left, but he was at the creation of the whole front page of Hospodářské noviny saying Czechs. And it was just made 3 or 4 special pages explaining how horrible it would be. So there was 2 purposes of it. Like one was to sell the newspaper, Czechs, and other was like to behave responsibly. Look how how horrible it would be, even though the leaders of Prague noviny, probably 90% of them would never think about leaving EU. And then it was started to live on its own, and it was everywhere, and foreign diplomats were asking like crazy, what's happening? Are you really discussing like Czechs? But it has never been on the table by any important players. And obviously, I absolutely disagree with giving such a question to referendum. It doesn't make any sense.
Only technical remarks. Other thing really is joining of Eurozone. I think that in this case, referendum is necessary.
But the Czechs have already committed to joining the Eurozone when they joined the European Union. There was no date, no?
But during those 14 years, Eurozone completely changed. Right now, Eurozone is on his way to the transfer union and this common bond and so on. That's completely different. Everybody is seeing this. So
everything is a process of the transformation and development, of course. And so I'm also against the referendum on the question of Eurozone, because so no date is a good day for joining Eurozone. No, we can say that it will be November the 15th. No one knows what will happen before November 16th. So it is a political decision. So, whenever we will open the debate on Eurozone, definitely we will lose it. So it is a different case to the EU membership. And it is so important for us that the political representation has to be brave enough to decide and to explain the decision, not to ask people to solve the problem of Eurozone, because it is very complicated and it has some consequences, some complications, and some I don't know, so whatever. But it's very hard, and elite must be brave enough. Why not? So, as you said, we are paying them. Please decide.
I would just like to slightly better point, sir.
Well, yeah, I agree that the politicians should decide that, because in general, statewide referenda are simply wrong, in my opinion, because most of the time you won't really find such a simple question that you can really answer with just yes or just no. Especially the Eurozone entry, it would be yes, but dependent on the conditions, such as the exchange rate. But on the Euro debate, I think that we need to have more public debate before the politicians take the decision, and it should actually concern the financial and the non-financial aspects of the membership, because it may be that we would be paying for non-financial gains. That's first thing, such as more influence in the EU. And more influence over what is then imposed on us through the EU. And the second thing is that we somehow debate about membership in the Eurozone as being or not being advantageous for the Czech Republic. But obviously it will never be advantageous for everybody in the same way. It will be advantageous for some segments of the Czech society, and it may be disadvantageous for other segments of the Czech society. And the state, again, not the EU, and not the parts of the society, should be prepared to actually somehow make good to the segments of the society that will be punished by the Eurozone entry, to somehow help them to overcome these problems. But again, I don't really think that our public debate is mature enough to actually realize that we again need to do something at home first, and only then we will understand what the decision at the EU level actually means.
The clock is running down. I'm wondering, are there any questions from anybody in the audience for our panel here? Yes, could you please? Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I didn't hear from the panelists is What responsibility does the EU leadership have to make the case for why the Czech Republic should be a member, or for that matter, any member of the EU, since there's growing skepticism of EU membership, not just in Central Europe, but all across the continent?
If any of you would like to respond?
Okay, I'll start. I hold the mic, and then I will pass it. Well, who's the EU leadership? Our Prime Minister is the EU leadership. Our ministers are part of the EU leadership. Part of their job is to be a European politician. The Commission, I'm slightly unhappy with the current state of the Commission because it combines the technical and the political. So it is kind of difficult for them to take the political stances and to be the technical authority at the same time. So I think that would be actually even more problematic if they somehow push too hard. I think this needs to be done by the politicians in the states themselves to realize that they are European politicians and make the case, first and foremost.
You know, who are real European leaders? Usually there is German Chancellor and French President. Especially in this time, I would say that the French President is a real leader. His ideas are definitely leading European debate. His proposals. I think that Germany is playing much more secretly in Brussels couloirs, and in European debate it's necessary to follow their proposals, because through the European Commission their proposals is coming to the table of other countries. That's a reality. No details about all this structure and legal structure and discuss and so on, and who is technically and who is bureaucratically. Generally, migration quotas, it was proposal of Germany. And right now, all this financial integration is proposal of France. Yeah, and it's necessary to understand real debate and who is a real leader in European Union.
So, I agree the leaders are those who are now in the position. But going back to the history, also EU went through the deep crisis in the period of Charles de Gaulle. And Charles de Gaulle, he was brave enough to put on the paper the transformation. He asked Christian Fouchet, and Christian Fouchet prepared plan 1, plan 2, and he put on the paper how he was going to transform European Union, European communities. So, my recommendation to the political elite, if you are against, please put it on the paper. We will rethink your plan B. Because you know what happened the Nigel Farage after the referendum, he resigned because he has no plan B. Boris Johnson, where is his plan B? So I think that it is very important even for the Czech political elite to rethink what type of Europe we want to put on the paper. So that's also my recommendation to read the discourse of Emmanuel Macron and some other people, and to rethink, because we are speaking, Europe needs reform, we have to transform Europe, Europe needs reform. And I'm trying to read what type of reform is burning in my country. So what type of reform is for us profitable? So that's the question for the Czech leaders who are against. Because people, they must know what is the option. So going back, it is in the hands of the Czech Republic also. The question of the European Union, not or just for in the hands of the European leaders. I agree. Emmanuel Macron, dear Angela, the two leaders are today hero-playing leaders because of UK. UK is leaving. Unfortunately, common sense is leaving European structures. So the non-Eurozone countries will be in less comfortable position because of the British decision. And I give you my forecast. I'm still dreaming that UK will stay. It's remain. I am deeply convinced that in the very end they'll remain in. So believe me. So am I so naive person? Because there could be some opt-outs. So, and we will see. So maybe that I am stupid, naive person, but the cost is extremely high. So, and the Brits, it will be never. It could not be the same position like it was in the past. But I think that we will find some compromise.
Jan Macháček, would you like a final comment here?
Yes. So I think if you ask like what EU leaders should do on European level, or how they should like, what kind of a vision they should like come with or something, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but that in prosperous times like these, which are relatively prosperous, that there is any pressure for any major changes. So there's intellectuals and journalists can say, oh, leaders should do this, that, and speak more about values, about visions, but nothing will. If you even after this crisis, which started like in Eurozone like 2009, like what is there has been like the ESM created. There is, well, it's some people say that it's a substantial progress to some more integration, but it's actually not that relevant now. Now there is a discussion that maybe 10 years from now Eurozone will have full common deposit insurance scheme. 10 years from now, I don't believe what Lenka said here, that there will be a Eurobond transfer union anytime soon. Like Germans don't want it, so unless there is some new major economic or existential crisis for Europe, there is no chance that there will be new leaders which would introduce some simple, more understandable vision of Europe, or because there is no need for it, there is no demand for it. Most of the people in Europe want less Europe. So, but I think that that next crisis or next few crises will gradually change it, because still Europe is an experiment and it cannot survive in a state of experiment forever. It will either disintegrate or it will somehow be more simple, understandable structure. Like it will do more important things in the center, and some things it will deliver back to the national states. But everyone understands, and history knows national state and the confederation and federation, but there is no experience. Mankind has no experience in this very complicated experimental structure, and Europe is in a state of experiment. So only next crisis can change it into something more stable. But this is my very personal opinion. So.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up. We're out of time. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank the viewers for watching this online. And I'd also like to thank the Faculty of Social Sciences for helping us to organize this event, especially to Alena Prochkova for all her help in organizing this, and everybody else who helped us and spread the word about this debate. And of course, I'd like to thank our panelists, Cyril Svoboda, Lenka Zlámalová, Tomáš Weiss, and Jan Macháček. Please give them a big round of applause.